Hello, everyone. We will get started with today's presentation. I am just going to share my screen with you all real quick. All right. So in today's presentation, I will be talking more about F1 post-completion optional practical training. This week is going to be part 1 of the information sessions. Next week will be part 2 of the OPT information sessions. Part 1, so this week, today, I will be covering the things that you should know before you apply for OPT. Next week, during part 2, we will go more in depth of the documents to submit to USCIS. So yeah. All right, so these are the things that we will be covering in today's presentation. The thing that I would like to highlight is at the very end, I have left some room for questions and answers. So if you do have any questions throughout today's presentation, definitely feel free to put them right away in the chat box. Once I end this meeting, or not meeting, but presentation, I will go back to the chat box, scroll up and answer all of the questions that you may have had throughout the presentation accordingly. So I will stop sharing my video so then you can see all of the information. I just don't want to cover up any of the information on these slides. And we'll get started with what is optional practical training. So OPT is a type of work permit for F1 students that allows students to work off campus post-graduation. Post-completion OPT is usually for 1 year, so it's up to 12 months. STEM majors can extend for another 2 years. The thing that I want to mention about this is whether you are graduating with a STEM major or a non-STEM major from MSU, just keep in mind that if you are interested in optional practical training or OPT, all students, no matter your major, must do post-completion OPT first. If you are a STEM eligible major, then you could extend off of your post-completion OPT time period. If you do have any questions about the STEM OPT extension, feel free to reach out to the Kearney Center. We can definitely provide you more information, but today we'll be specifically talking about post-completion OPT and what that looks like. Moving on, schools will issue the OPT I-20. So the Kearney Center advisors, once we've reviewed everything, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but once we have reviewed everything, and if everything looks good to go, then we will issue you your OPT I-20 to send off to USCIS. The process of adjudication takes at least 90 days, but it could take upwards of 150 days to process with USCIS. So basically the revision process of your OPT application, it does take a couple of months for USCIS to make a decision, and depending on the volume that they are currently working with could factor into, whether it is soon that you hear back from them or a little bit later that you hear back. So it can really vary. At any point in time, if you have questions about the processing time, if it exceeds the processing time, so if it exceeds 150 days, definitely reach out to the Kearney Center for advice. If the OPT is approved, so if your application is approved, then USCIS will issue you a personal employment authorization document, also known as like an EAD card or OPT card. So I think throughout this presentation, I kind of use them seamlessly from one or the other. So when I say EAD or OPT card, same thing. It is a card that you will receive from USCIS that states when you are approved to work. And that kind of brings us to that next bullet point. The student, so you must not begin working before the start date listed on your card. So your EAD card will say a start date and an end date. Please, please, please work between those dates. Don't start working sooner. and then stop working on that end date if that is the end of your OPT time period. So, are you eligible to apply for OPT? I have three things to kind of ask yourself. You know, are you graduating in 90 days? If so, now is that time to start preparing and start applying if you are interested in applying for OPT. If not, if you're joining today's presentation and you won't be graduating in 90 to 100 days, then this might be a little bit too soon to apply, but it's not too soon to gather this information and to prepare when you do need to apply. But one thing I would like to say is definitely come to those information sessions in the term that you will be graduating, because you just never know if things will change or if information will update, things like that. So just kind of keep that in mind. The other thing to kind of ask yourself is, have you been on F1 status for the last 2 semesters? If you have, great. If you're unsure, definitely reach out to the Kearney Center advisors and we can take a look at your SEVIS record. Basically, what we would be looking at is, have you had an active SEVIS record and maintained your F1 status for the last 2 semesters? The last thing to ask yourself is, have you done more than 365 days of full-time CPT? If you haven't, great. If you have, that would be an issue, but that's something that the Kearney Center advisors are, we take a look at when we do CPT, but just kind of keep that in mind. We can definitely take a look just to ensure that you haven't gone over the 365 days, but you can also take a look at previous CPT I-20s to also look up that information as well if you do have any concerns about any CPT, your CPT time that you've done. The next slide is talking about what is your completion date. This is very important because this factors in when you can apply for OPT, which is actually my next slide, and I'll kind of flip back and forth of these 2 slides. So this is the OPT timeline. Probably one of my more favorite ones. I'm a visual person, I don't know about you, but this gives a good visual of what you can roughly expect. So in the previous slide, we're talking about that completion date. So when are you done with all coursework? For graduate students, it could be thesis, APP defense date, it could be the last day of the assistantship, or it could be the last day of the semester, or commencement, or commencement, I should say. So for graduate students, it could vary on a couple of different things. And it's whatever is the latest date. So whatever date you will be done with all of your coursework and earn your degree, that is that anchor date or program completion date. So that's the date that you want to go off of. Count back 90 days, and that brings us to roughly now if you're graduating, and we'll be done with everything on December 11th, 2020. For undergraduate students, it is the last day of the semester typically, because that's when students are done with everything. Undergraduate students don't necessarily have thesis, APP defense date, and they don't necessarily have like an assistantship. So it's typically the last day of the semester that students will complete their, or what is their completion date. So keep that date in mind. Think about when will you be done, okay? So whether you are a graduate student or an undergraduate student, keep that date in mind. For the remainder of this presentation, I have used December 11th, 2020 as that date. But keep in mind, let's say you have an assistantship that goes until December 31st, then these dates would look a little bit different. and the dates moving forward. So I will go forward and then jump back a little bit. So when do you apply for OPT? You can apply for, so if December 11th, 2020 is your program completion date, the first date that you can apply for OPT is actually September 14th, 2020. It's a Monday. The last date that you can apply is 60 days from your program completion date, so February 9th, 2021. So again, if December 11th isn't your program completion date, just kind of count back 90 days, count forward 60 days, and that brings you to the 150 days total that you could be applying for OPT. So again, visually, this is December 11th, 2020, count back 90 days. Technically, it is September 12th, but the Kearney Center will be closed on Saturday. So that Monday, which I'll talk about in the upcoming slides, we will be processing OPT documents on that date. That's the first day that we will. And then 60 days after is, 60 days after is also the time frame that you can apply as well. So visually, this is what you can expect, but this is it in words. Okay, so how do you choose an OPT start date? You must start the OPT within 60 days of graduation. So if December 11th, 2020 is the graduation date or your completion date, your OPT start date must be chosen between December 12th, 2020 and February 9th, 2021. The authorization is for 1 year. So when you choose a start date, then you can choose it a year minus a day, basically. So if you want January 15th, 2021, you'll need to indicate that on your OPT form, which I'll be talking about next week in the part 2 presentation. So you can put January 15th, 2021 as that start date, the end date, January 14th, 2022. Okay, so again, going back to the visual, it's kind of confusing. This is a time frame when you can apply for OPT if you haven't done so already, but it's also a time frame when you need to choose a start date. So this is December 12th to February 9th. So if you can visually kind of picture those dates, that's the 60-day time frame. And then whatever you get approved for, let's say that you want January 15th, 2021, and you do get that date, then it's up to the 12 months that the OPT would last. All right, so how do you apply for OPT? The first step is start completing and compiling your OPT documents. At this time, since the Kearney Center advisors are primarily working remotely during this time and we're not necessarily within the office, we ask that you put all of your OPT documents in an OPT zip folder. And then once you're done, then you can email that to your advisor. And then you can schedule a virtual appointment with your advisor to kind of go through the documents and talk through any questions that you may have. If everything looks good to go, then the Kearney Center advisors would print out an OPT I-20 that you would then submit to USCIS along with your other OPT documents. The third step is before you do mail everything off, just make sure that you review for accuracy, sign and date the I-20s, especially as well as the I-765 form. I'll be going through this next week. And then once everything is compiled, ready, then you, the student, can mail everything off to USCIS. Keep in mind that when OPT is recommended within your CBIS record and the OPT I-20 is printed, it will be very important that you mail everything off to USCIS within 30 days of that OPT recommendation date, okay? We want to avoid any denials, and that could be a reason that you do get denied for OPT is because you held onto your documents for too long and you mailed it after the 30 days. So basically, once you get the clearance from your Kearney Center immigration advisor and you've compiled everything, mail it out as soon as possible, as soon as you can. That way it gets to USCIS in time. Oops, sorry about that. Here's another visual down at the bottom. So again, real quickly, first step, you, the student, you request OPT by compiling your OPT documents and sending them to your advisor. Second, advisors would then recommend OPT if everything looks good to go. Secondly, this is that mailing or filing I-765 form. So the student, you would mail everything off to USCIS for revision. Step 4, USCIS adjudicates your I-765 form, basically reviewing your application. And then lastly, step 5 is student would get EAD card if approved and can start working. Once the student starts working, then the student would need to report that to the SEVP portal account. So you would get your own personal portal account where you could document where you are working. All right, so what is in your OPT packet? These are the various things that are going to be in the OPT packet. All of these documents will be specifically talked about in next week, part 2 information session. So if you are graduating soon, interested in applying for OPT, definitely come next week to the part 2 information session, and we will talk more about these documents, how to fill everything out. We'll talk more about the various copies to include. The OPT form, it's not included in here, but yeah, we'll definitely talk about these documents next week. One thing that I would like to make note of, because this is one of the biggest updates that have happened, or the biggest news, or changes, I should say. So currently the I-765 form, that filing fee is currently $410. On October 2nd of this year, the filing fee will increase to $550. So therefore, if you are graduating December 11th, 2020, and you are interested in applying for OPT, we recommend that you save over $100 and apply before October 2nd so that you don't have to pay the fee increase amount. Because any application that will go out after October 2nd will need to have that $550 fee attached to it. So keep that in mind. So if that helps, determine when to apply. While you are waiting for OPT approval, just keep in mind that you cannot start working until you have your EAD card in hand. You cannot start working during your grace period without that OPT authorization and OPT card / your EAD card. So basically when students are approved for OPT, again, they get this card. This card, the EAD, will state a start date and an end date, and you can only work between those dates. If you have any questions about, when can I start? I got a job offer, can I start now? Definitely talk to your immigration advisor if you do have specific questions like that. But just keep in mind that, if you don't have the card, you do have a job offer, you'll need to, talk about, starting a little bit later with that job or that position. So just being very transparent when job searching is something that I would suggest and advise. And then lastly, maintain valid F1 status. So you can do this by updating your US physical address within your e-services or with your immigration advisor, but that's typically done when applying. So that doesn't necessarily happen too often unless you change addresses. And then just only work, you know, when you're authorized to work, and that's how you maintain status. Keep in mind that you will remain in an active F1 status after you graduate because you'll have that pending OPT application. After submitting your documents, please contact your DSO or your immigration advisor if you do receive a rejection notice and or a denial letter to talk through those specific letters that were written to you. So this isn't meant to scare you, but it's just to make you aware that, you know, rejection notices and denial letters, they do happen, but they happen for specific reasons. And it's kind of hard to advise unless we see your specific letter that you received from USCIS about why your application got rejected or denied. There's options, so we can definitely talk through your options. So yeah, just keep this in mind. Here's some general employment information. All employment must be related to your field of study. So think about the major that you had here at MSU, and that is where you should find the position. So unfortunately, if you graduated with a biology major, if you find a position within marketing or advertisement, those don't really, you know, pair together, right? You know, one is working in the science field, one is business field, so separate. So again, all employment must be in your field of study. Keep in mind that you can switch employers while on OPT. You must update your SEVP portal account with your employer information, as well as your US physical address at any point in time. You'll have 10 days to make those updates. You can update your DSO or immigration advisor if you are unable to access or get into your SEVP portal account. So again, it's super nice when students are approved for OPT, they get their personal account, and that is how they can record where they are working and where they are currently living. And just keep in mind that these changes need to be done within 10 days if I haven't already said that. You can have multiple employers. There is no cap on the number of hours, so there's a potential that you could have an employer for 30 hours and then another employer for 20 hours, and then you're working 50 hours per week. So however you work it out, just make sure that you are working within your field of study. You are responsible for reporting your employment and keeping track of your days of unemployment. And that actually brings us to my next point, which is about unemployment, and then I'll talk about volunteering. So first, unemployment. A student on post-completion OPT can be unemployed for a total of 90 days. Keep in mind that these 90 days are not necessarily the first 90 days once you're approved. It's a nice buffer time, but it could be 30 days here. You work for like 3 months and then you get unemployed, and then it's 30 more days. Now you're at 60 days of unemployment. So basically what I'm trying to say is it doesn't need to be consecutive. It's overall during the time frame that you have been approved for post-completion OPT, you can accrue a total of 90 days. A student whose record or SEVP portal lacks employment information is considered unemployed. So if you do have a position, my recommendation is that you go into your SEVP portal account and report who you're working with, report that start date as soon as you can, because that will stop that unemployment counter clock that you have on your record. And then, again, this isn't meant to scare, but just to make you all aware, excuse me, that USCIS officials can manually terminate a student's record who have accrued 90 days total of unemployment. So just kind of keep that in mind, that this is serious. You can't, you know, once you're approved, you can't just accrue however many days of unemployment. There is a cap of 90 days. If you can't find a paying position, a full-time paying position within your field of study, another way to kind of stop your unemployment clock is if you find a true volunteer position in your related field. So you can volunteer to maintain your status, and just kind of keep in mind that this volunteer position shouldn't be a position that would normally be paid. So that's why I say it should be a true volunteer position from a company in your related field of study. All right, almost done. Next, we're talking about OPT and traveling. Now more than ever, if you are considering traveling while on OPT, definitely talk to your immigration advisor, and we can provide you with some considerations to think about before you do decide to travel. So a valid passport with an unexpired F1 visa stamp, Form I-20, so make sure that is updated. It says your OPT has been approved. If you're currently working, then your employer should be stated on your OPT I-20, and you'll need a travel signature on page 2. Oh, okay, I did. I was just looking. I was like, oh, I don't know if I put F1 visa stamp, but I did. So valid passport, that's the first bullet point. Valid unexpired passport with unexpired visa stamp. If your visa has expired, then before you come back, you'll need to factor in a visa renewal appointment, because that is that's the main purpose of the F1 visa stamp, is for reentry purposes. So if it has expired, just factor in a renewal appointment. Sorry, jumping down to the third bullet point. It will be really important that you travel with your unexpired EAD card. So make sure that you travel with that. And then proof of employment, like a job offer letter, a recent pay stub. Maybe you have a job interview that you need to come back to the United States for, things like that. Traveling while OPT is pending. While online, it says that you can technically travel, but travel with caution. The Kearney Center advises that you do not travel during this time. There's a few main points of why we wouldn't advise a student to travel, you know, such as, you know, what if you do receive a rejection notice or a denial letter? Then we would need to talk through that. You would need to send in your documents again, and that could be quite difficult if you're currently outside of the United States. The other thing too is if you are approved for OPT and you're currently outside of the United States, it would be expected that you come back into the United States with that approved OPT card. So that's another reason where with timing, you could run into some issues. There's some more or just other considerations. So if you really are thinking about traveling while your OPT is pending or processing and being reviewed by USCIS, definitely reach out to your immigration advisor. All right, so kind of wrapping up today's presentation. Again, next week, we will be doing part 2. So going more in depth on the OPT documents to submit with USCIS. What you should bring is started and or completed OPT documents. Again, I will be reviewing, or I will be emailing, I will be emailing out today's presentation. I'll also provide a list of documents that are needed for your OPT packet. So get started if you want, or complete them, and then just come with your questions. So here are the part 2 dates, the time, and then the virtual meeting location. So I hope to see you next week if you are interested in learning more about the documents. And then OPT processing day. So on Monday, September 14th, 2020, please make sure that you email your immigration advisor a zip folder with all of your OPT documents. That way we can review your OPT documents. We will be available, us advisors, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on this Monday. So once you email your immigration advisor, feel free to stop by our Zoom room for verbal feedback on your documents. We might mention that some edits are needed. You know, maybe you missed a signature here or there, things like that. So we can definitely provide verbal feedback and go through your documents one by one. Please make sure all OPT documents are complete. If you do have any questions, that's definitely okay. And then again, if everything is ready and looks good to go for mailing, then you will receive your I-20 that is signed via email. So that concludes today's presentation. I'm curious what questions you have, so I will take a look at those questions that you put into the chat box and answer them accordingly. But thank you so much for your patience during this time, and let's get started on those questions.